we've got this note from the Ghana Chamber of Telecommunications, and they are saying, I'm going to read it very quickly, the Ghana Telecommunications Chamber, on behalf of its members, Airtel, Tigo, MTN and Vodafone, wishes to notify its esteemed customers and the general public of tariff modifications following the implementation of the new tax laws. In short, the note said that network charges will go up from November 2018. My colleague Roland Walker is standing by now with Ken Ashigbe to get more explanation of how this affects you and I. Right, Roland, I understand you're with the head of the Telecommunications Chamber. What exactly are you able to discover for us?
Well, the whole point is that following that press release, that statement, tongues have been wagging and many minds have been wondering as to what impact they will be. But we also know that we can trace that to the mid-year budget review, where we had a delinking of the GET fund as well as the National Health Insurance Levy component from the general VAT structure. It also means that VAT will be calculated at 12.5, but you pay the other component. You remember we were told that there won't be any implications directly, but I guess indirectly will all be affected, and that's why the Telecoms Chamber. What makes this different also is that for a very long time, or for something that looks a bit unprecedented, we have all the major telecom companies under the Chamber agreeing that this needs to be revised as far as the pricing mechanism is concerned, so that they have to transfer the onward cost to them, to the consumer, and that is you and I, and then, well, my relatives are in the Volta or Central region or elsewhere, and that's a concern all of us would want to find out. But whether that's a concern also, that's why we have Ken Ashigbe, who is the Chief Executive for the Telecoms Chamber. But we're live here in your office. But what may have precipitated this in the first place, coming out with that release?
Thank you. That is the Ghana Chamber of Telecommunications. Yes, exactly. Well, you know, the Chamber operates on this co-opetition principle, where we cooperate on things that generally affect the whole industry, but we are within a very competitive environment. And so the structure of the industry is such that cost is very significant. There's a lot of cost, you know, and the margins are really, really very depressed, you know. And so when a tax is imposed, definitely what then would have to happen is that, because it's a tax, and if you look at the practice note that was issued by GRA, it's specific on who the tax is incident on. These levies have become sales taxes, so it's a consumer tax. So as an industry, it's just deciding that principle of saying that there's a tax that has been imposed, government has clearly identified who the incidence is on, so it ought to be passed on. So the industry came together and decided that, yes, we don't just have to talk to the Ministry of Communication, Ministry of Finance, and NCA that we have written to, but most importantly, our consumers as well. We also need to inform them out of the fact that you want to be transparent, you want to be accountable to both government and also to your consumers, and let them prepare for it. So it's the reason why together as an industry, we are coming together to be able to inform our consumers about this.
So it means that it's been a commensurate or simultaneous information. You're giving it to the agencies, that's the ministries, the two, communication and finance, and then also now you're telling us the consumers. Ultimately, that also means that it's going to have some reflection on the usage as far as what the cost component for the consumer is. Do we know the percentages, what really is the consumer going to pay?
So, you know, when it comes to pricing, because of the competitive nature of the industry, you want, you know, the market and the operators to determine the pricing themselves. So what we are setting off as an industry is the fact it's this 5% tax that is going to be applied. But then very soon, the MNOs, the operators themselves, are going to communicate directly to their consumers and tell them, you know, how this is going to be. So what we are sure of is that this 5% tax would happen. But depending on which operator you are on, depending on which plan you are on, depending on which plan you move to, the impact will be different. But it's definitely this 5% combination of the NHI and the GET fund that would be passed on.
Well, we're told that nothing will happen. At the time that the mid-year budget review was ongoing, why then do we have perhaps a second tier reflection of costs on the consumer then, at least in one sector?
Well, it's not in one sector. I'm sure if you notice that the beverage industry have had, a revision of their charges. I'm sure those in the FMGCs themselves have also had a revision. I'm not too sure of nothing what happened, because the thing about it, yes, it's still 17.5, but the way it is treated has completely changed. So our industry would be able to claim they are 12.5%, but that 5% is supposed to be passed on to customers. Maybe it's the effect, let's see how that happens. That might not be, that would just be around the 5%.
Should we wait as consumers to gauge what the cost will be, or you want to tell us, so that even though you formed us, we know that this is how much or bearable it could be for us?
Well, what would be passed on would just be the tax, the 5% tax that would happen.
And that's still a lot.
Yes, well, but that's the law. That's the law that has been passed. If you look into the 9 acts. The various acts that have been amended, I think it's 970, 971, and 972. It's very clear, exactly in terms of what that is going to be. And so, but the interesting thing is that, as I said, and just to repeat, is that the conversation between pricing would be done between the telcos, the individual telcos, and their customers. And it would depend on so many other factors. But I can tell, what I can see as an industry is that it's just going to be that 5% taxes that are going to be passed on. And all of us, we need to all pay our taxes. And I just would want to say that that's why I am happy that government has decided that next year, all people to government taxes are going to be done via electronic means. And I am pretty sure if that happens, it's going to improve the efficiency of the collection of these taxes. It's going to reduce the waste, it's going to reduce the corruption that surrounds it. It's going to ensure that there's a lot more transparency. And the way mobile money has stretched financial inclusion and gotten a lot more people involved, a lot more people might now be contributing a lot more, to the extent that government could then decide to even reduce the incidence of the taxes that are on people, but then at the end of the day, increase the taxes that would come. And due to the transparency, the government would be able to see them, a lot more of this cash and use that for development. And I think that's a better alternative than, some of the proposals some people have had to say, oh, let's impose taxes on mobile money. You rather would want to grow the financial inclusion, grow the uptake of mobile money, make sure that the 7.5 also Ghanaians who currently are not within the financial sector are brought in to help formalize the sector. So, well, all of us need to pay taxes. Nobody likes to pay taxes. I am sure, from the president down to everybody, nobody wants to pay taxes. Our concern should be the fact that these taxes, once they come, they should result in the betterment of our lives. And for us, what our members will do to be able to ensure that the elasticity of demand that can be affected by increase of price will be the value that would be given. And I'm sure we would be investing in ensuring that we can give our customers a lot more value.
I think that's for the marketing, the selling propositions and the selling points. But at the end of the day, I've always had this understanding that perhaps maybe as a chamber, your members, who are the service providers, may have been absorbing some component of cost. And if that is the situation, what were they, or what are they? And so now it's become unbearable, so they have to push this one on us.
Yes, so if you look at taxes that have happened in the past, the business, because of wanting to be competitive, and wanting an uptake of it, have absorbed some of these taxes that have happened, but then you get to a particular point where your margins are so depressed that you've cut the fat.
Are you serious? Telecommunication companies, their margins compressing?
it's constantly happening. You see, you should bear in mind that this is an industry where most of your costs are forex based. All the capex virtually are forex based, and so as the CD depreciates, your costs go up. You have challenges with a lot of multiple. If you take the MMDAs, even wanting to put a cell site, there are various charges that are coming up. If you look at how much it is that in Ghana we pay for licenses compared to what happens in other jurisdictions. Tanzania, 4G license 4G at what, 20 million? In the past when MTN bought it, it was around 67 point something million dollars. So the cost component in doing business in our environment is quite high, and we try to use technologies to be able to reduce the cost, but there's so much that you can do, and it gets to a point where you realize that where your margins are going, and you should bear in mind currently the industry pays about 40% of almost close to 40% of turnover to government as taxes, levies, fees, and all of that. So how much is it that a business can take? Because after you've paid 40%, you need to have money to be able to invest in into new technologies, and you need to make sure that you are expanding. You need to also have money to be able to pay your staff that work within the environment. You also need to definitely have an incentive for your shareholders to want to invest. Currently, Ghanaians are shareholders of, on the stock exchange, one of the telcos. If you look at the rest of them, government has shares in them as well. So, all of this, you want to have a good balance to ensure that, these businesses are profitable, to encourage a lot more investments, because 5G technology is coming, 4G, we are not, even in terms of 3G, it's not spread throughout the country. Our licenses expect us to be all throughout the country, but you need investment to be able to do that. So there's so much that the business will be able to take. At this stage, this is not one of them.
Well, I'm surprised that you paint a picture of, even though the sector looks to be the most promising among the many sectors we have, apart from the extractive industry in the medium to long term, you seem to suggest that the companies really could be struggling if they have excessive costs. But look, let's be real. Companies, just like all technology companies, as we have here, would have increases in operational costs, and that could affect the OPEX as well. And technology is changing by the day. Actually, on a 12-hour basis, technology is changing, and also that will have a reflection because you want to satisfy customers. But how ultimately, in the medium to long term, could that affect, just beyond that, what the consumer pays by way of the cost for using your service?
Well, at the end of the day, so as technology comes, the challenge with technology is that the new technologies tend to make you be a bit more efficient, but definitely you need money to be able to do those investments. So you would require money. With the technology side, I'm not too sure how that would drive cost up. It should be driving costs down. It should be allowing us to be able to do more. But most of the time, it is the charges and the fees and the taxes that come. And we, in our engagement with policymakers and with our regulators, we're trying to see how that can be done so that it would, ensure that consumers can get a lot more service. Go typically to the Scandinavians. You find out that in the Scandinavians, licenses are virtually giving out for very low cost, but with the intention that let us spur a lot more growth. So it's akin to the current government's principle of saying, a lot less tax, but spared production. So our, thinking would be for government to rather look into that to say, how do we reduce the incidence to allow a lot more productivity? And bear in mind that the telecom sector is the transmission over which a lot more businesses would grow. If you take even mobile money, for example, the billions that currently are sitting in the banks, if it was not for MFS, that currently would be absent. The Bank of Ghana benefits from the various banks that benefit from it. Government itself is now, it sees a lot more. And we need to encourage all of these to happen. You don't want to see the situation where we are imposing taxes on mobile money, for example. We saw the example in Uganda where taxes were imposed, and within 2 weeks, uptake dropped, revenues dropped, and they did a partial repeal of the law, but it did not reverse it, and so it's important that these fiscal policies, when we are bringing them up, we make sure that the policies are aligned, as congruent, so that where we want to go, where we want to make sure that a lot more people are adopting this technology to be able to do different things that can spend, most importantly, bring people into the formal sector, bring other businesses up. These things should happen.
Okay, so you're saying that you always advocate the government reduces the incidence of tax on the sector because we have other derivatives, or there's a certain value chain around which the industry can grow and others can also hinge on. That's it? That's always been your position?
Yes, that's that, and it's not just our position, but it has worked in other jurisdictions where you have found out that, and I think that's the paradigm that when the government talks about a lot less tax but more production, that's the principle, because, you know,
but even in the states where we have so-called more excessive taxes, you still post incredible profits or incredible revenues or numbers.
Yeah, so I'm sure it's good to say revenue, but profits, because if you look into the industry, you know, exactly. So there's a lot of revenue that is being generated, but what people don't look at is the cost, the huge cost that is also associated with it. Bear in mind, this is an industry that has seen a merger of two big companies. You know, in industry that you see mergers, definitely it tells you that some fundamentals, you know, are reading all right when it comes to profitability. Because if it's profitable, what you want to do is you want to keep the profit to yourself. But when your margins are challenged, that's where you want to consolidate to ensure that you can maximize your profitability.
Are we going to see these increases on data too, or just across the service usage or spectrum?
Yeah, you see, you know that what happens is that when you buy a scratch card, it's the consumer that determines what they want to do with it. I can decide to use it for data, I can decide to use it for voice, I can bundle it. And the tax is incident on our general revenue. So definitely it would cut across, you know, the spectrum of services that are offered by the telecommunications sector, which are taxable.
That includes mobile money?
No, you know, so there's no CST on mobile money, and that's, you know, it's a principle that we hope that same way that government reduced, you know, the taxes on banking services, government would also ensure that for mobile money that affects, the generality, the masses of the people, there will be no taxes. So currently, no, it does not affect that. The only taxes that are mobile money are withholding taxes for the people who are playing there. But when you send your money, there's no tax on that. And we hope that government will keep that and would rather be able to encourage a lot more people to use mobile money to spend up a lot more verticals that would yield to the development of this country.
Okay, but 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 consumers in the rural communities who constantly may not use data, but will use more of just the normal voice and just be using text messages to communicate, etc. That will have a huge burden on them, because there are concerns about affordability and people's levels of income. For you telecom companies, did you do all these considerations, or just looking at your general operational burden?
Well, it's a consideration that we do, because our service is not, we look more at purpose than profit, because we believe that the more people who are able to consume our services and, be able to build their businesses, develop themselves, study and all of that, the more we would create, the opportunities to be able to make more revenue. So it's definitely something that we have looked at, and that's what helps when it comes to the pricing. And I'm sure when the telcos are talking themselves, they would be able to consider that.
Your general operations, we're not going to see job losses and all that, because you're expanding at the end of the day.
Yeah, I don't think this would result in any job losses. The plan is, even if you look at rural telephony, there's a lot of work going on between GEFEC and some of our members to be able to expand that. Our members are looking to be able to deploy the new technologies. We're hoping that, come 2019, when licenses are renewed, we'll go to unified license, technology neutrality, so that our members will be able to use the spectrums that they have to be able to to deliver more services and more value. Mobile financial services, currently Ghana is now ranked at like 4th with Uganda. We've come from a far place. The Regulator Bank of Ghana is working with our members to be able to develop a lot more opportunities, interoperability. We should be able to finish phase 2 to make sure that we can use leverage on that particular space to make sure that Ghana, we can formalize our economy to be able to also generate in the long run, generate a lot more revenue for government so that we can use that for the development that all of us seek.
Well, you talked about sub-region and how Ghana's is always high, etc. If you look at what the analysis is, but how do we fare in terms of what the incidence of taxation is on the industry, and then also what the end user pays? How does it fare with other countries? We have Nigeria, we have Benin, Togo, Liberia, etc.
There was a report that was issued by GSMA which looks at all of these KPIs. And the good thing is that Ghana seems to be trending, will tend to be making progress. When it comes to cost...
You mean we're better?
Yes, yeah,
in terms of expansion, technology, innovation?
Yes, if you put everything...
So where are we lacking then?
You know, so definitely that in terms of cost to the consumer, our telecommunication cost is trending low. We're you know, I mean...
You mean consumers in Ghana pay more?
Turning lower, you know, gradually if you take...
We're paying less.
If you take if you use like salary, the percentage of your salary that you use for these services, the trend is...
Are you sure?
I would share data with you, Roland. I'll share data with you once this is done. There's research that has been done. So there's empirical evidence to really show that some of the challenges we have is definitely in terms of taxes, the industry is paying a lot of taxes, you know, relatively in our industry.
Okay. I have two more questions. The first one is, when you informed the oversight ministries, we have communications directly, and then when it comes to the financial aspect, the supervision will be the finance ministry, and because, you know, it's a political issue, what was the response? Were they empathetic as far as the citizens' side is, so to speak?
There's been, we just sent the notices out. We've not had an engagement yet. There's plan to have a tax dialogue forum that is coming up next week. I'm sure there will be some.
So you're increasing the costs or the prices, or the consumer is going to pay more from November 1, but you just informed the government ministries or institutions. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, you see, when it comes to costing, the licenses do not mandate you to get permission because we operate within a very liberalized, you know, environment. But it's important, you know, it's Ghanaian that when you're doing these things, you talk to your stakeholders. So we've informed our stakeholders, you know, and the state, you know, the Ministry of Finance are very much aware of all of this. And I'm sure it's for that reason why this mode was chosen in terms of the VAT increase rather than the other way.
Are you pushing government? Are you pushing government by way of this, perhaps coming to say, okay, then we're exempting you for a certain component, etc.?
Well, we've had conversation with the GRA where we have talked about the fact that when it comes to some of these taxes, our industry is quite peculiar. So it will be good to be able to engage. And
so this is your move to make sure that you get that?
The good thing is that there's already a forum that is in place called the Tax Dialogue by the Ministry of Finance and the GRA and all of that. And there's engagement that goes on in those places. There's a meeting going to come up the next, you know, for the next budget to look at, you know, these conversations. We would engage at those levels, and it's a very open, you know, forum, and we hope that we'll be able to ensure that our voices will be heard.
Okay, so September 1, you're setting it's November 1. It's gonna come on.
November 1, yes, it's going to happen.
Okay. No turning back.
Well, you see, the law took effect 1st of August, so the law has been passed. We need to obey the law.
All right, but Kelny GVG, Interconnect Clearinghouse, core monitoring and all that. What's the latest on it for you? I'm told by the intel I have, all your members have connected to the system. So, I mean, we're going with it, whether we like it or not.
Well, the good thing is that there's been open conversation. There's been meetings between the engineers and the engineers from KLD-GVG and NCA. And so they're looking for engineering solutions to the challenges that we had in terms of privacy of the networks of our consumers and also the security of our networks. There's a filter box that is coming up. We're looking at, SLAs that are surrounding that to ensure that we can guarantee that our customers, privacy and then the security of our networks are guaranteed. So far as monitoring is concerned, our industry has been monitored forever. So that would definitely.
So you don't have any more concerns about PEEPs, about privacy, all that you're raising?
What the concerns that we have, and with the way we're going, with the SLAs that are going to be signed, if all of that is done, there should not be any concern. The most important thing is that engineers need to work to ensure that that can really happen.
Oh, Ken Ashigbe, thanks for speaking to me. It's been a delight. And Ken Ashigbe is the Chief Executive for the Ghana Chamber of Telecommunications. But this is what I have to tell you. You and I, the ordinary consumer, include the politician as well, including him, we're all going to pay some extra charges from November 1, 2018 on the mobile service that we use. Doesn't include mobile money, I'm told. But just think about it. I have to hit the streets and start asking you and I, the ordinary Ghanaian, what you think about it. But now we have to bring you entertainment. Next, Becky will bring you the latest highlights.